Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider Series. Today, I am so excited to have Girish, former CEO of Total Energies Ventures, where I met him. And I've learned so much from him over the years, and I know you're going to learn a lot in the next 1 hour. Girish, welcome.
Thank you, Nicolas. Real pleasure and privilege to be here today.
Thank you. Do you mind maybe sharing your journey into corporate venturing? Everyone's journey is different, and yours is very special.
Yeah, if you look at my background, it's pretty unique in that I have worked in many different industries. So I started my career as a lawyer on Wall Street, focusing on M&A and banking, and I didn't particularly enjoy it. Then I went back to business school. And then I spent some years on the investment side at Prudential doing leverage buyouts, workouts, etc. And then I found myself on the healthcare side within Prudential, and then I moved to GE Capital. And so again, doing deals and doing private placements and M&A, things like that. So I've sort of been on the deal side a large part of my career. And during that time, this was sort of just as the internet was happening, and I discovered the internet. I just fell in love with it, saw the applications for financial services and healthcare, etc. And one thing led to the other, and I was recruited by United Healthcare, which is one of the largest managed care companies in the US. And I became their chief operations officer and ran their e-commerce strategy, their e-health strategy, and ran their backroom operations, etc. And as part of that, this was during the dot-com boom, and I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur as well. So my plan was to be a billionaire in 3 weeks. And so I left United Healthcare and did my own startup. And I have to say, one of the things I learned one is timing is everything, right? And in technology, particularly, as somebody much smarter than me told me, being too early is the same thing as being wrong. So back in 99, 2000, we had created a platform which today would be called cloud computing, and we call it application service provider. Then we had a SaaS model, which we call the pay, per employee per month, etc. But it was too early, and a lot of people struggle to understand what we were offering them. Today, you take a lot of these things for granted. The other thing was 9/11 happened. And once 9/11 happened, funding just froze, and there was absolutely no one funding anything. And if you were not ready, if you were not cash flow positive, you were basically dead, which we were not. And so we essentially had to sell ourselves at, like pennies on the dollar and moved on. So that was a significant lesson learned. And so I did get some entrepreneurial back experience there and dealt with VCs, but from the other side of the table. And after that, I sort of was funded by a private equity firm to do a roll-up in the healthcare industry, but somehow that never happened because we never found the platform acquisition. And then I moved to a company called ABB, which many of your listeners may know, based out of Zurich, but it's sort of global company in engineering in this smart grid and automation space. And amongst other things, I sort of ran some of their robotics businesses. And when the 2008 crisis happened, I realized this was a great time for us to be contrarian. ABB at that time was sitting on $500 million of cash. A new CEO had joined, a year ago from GE, somebody I'd known a little bit about. And I felt this was a great time and he was sort of complaining about a not invented here syndrome, which all large companies have. So I wrote to Joe Hogan and I said, hey, Joe, this may be a great time to start a corporate venture group. A, we're sitting on a lot of cash. B, because of the financial crisis, all the other investors are sitting on their hand. It may be a great time to go in, great valuations and great opportunities. And you complain about a not invented here syndrome, and this is something to address it. And, let's, what do you think? Within 30 minutes, I got an email back from the CEO saying, Girish, great idea, go for it.
Wow.
So, that was the kind of decision-making Joe Hogan brought. And so we started ABB Technology Ventures back in 2009. And one of my first hires was Kurt Kaltenegger, who is now running ABB Technology Ventures. He was at that point head of R&D in China, and one of the best people I hired, extraordinary, technically competent people. And over the years, hired a lot of people, including, one of the stars I had was Grant Allen, who now, as you know, runs ventures for Schneider Ventures.
Yep.
And then back in 2016 or 17, I forget, I got recruited by Total Energies to come. So I moved from Zurich to Paris. And the reason I moved there was things were getting a little difficult at ABB from a financial perspective and other things. And I also wanted to move into the energy climate space. And I thought also, living in Paris would be terrific. Maybe my wife will forgive all my sins, past, present, and future. And it was just an extraordinary time to come there. And I'm happy to, chat about what we did there. But that's how I found myself into corporate venturing.
Okay, thank you. I think this is more than I knew about you. So thank you for sharing the journey. Maybe I will double click with the very first part, which is probably not very common for head of CVCs to have a background as a lawyer, being trained as a lawyer. How much of that, because it comes with discipline and being careful and looking at the risk, how much of that has shaped you as the head of a corporate venturing and investment mindset?
Yeah. That has been very helpful, not just for the venturing side, but as I mentioned to you, I've been doing deals, M&A, private placements, things like that, whether at Prudential or GE Capital or other places. And as you know, all transactions are ultimately document heavy.
Yeah.
And so there's a large amount of negotiation which goes on there. So the thing is, A, you know what you're doing. B, you know how well to use your lawyers. You know what is a legal issue. You know what is a business issue. And the best lawyers are those who recognize that and basically will tell you, these are the legal issues and this is something you need to be aware of. And by the way, this is a business issue. You got to make that call. Once in a while, you come across a lawyer who also wants to make business calls and you got to make sure that does not happen. Yeah. I come across many times where people will say, oh, we can't do this because a lawyer said that. I said, are you the boss or is the lawyer the boss? Okay. If it's a legal issue where you cannot do it because it's illegal, that's a different issue. But if it's a risk issue, you got to decide as a business person whether the risk is worth it or not. Are you being adequately compensated for it, etc. Right? The other thing is you're not intimidated by the other side's lawyers. And, they can throw you all kinds of arguments and you know exactly what their game is. And so that certainly has been very helpful. But I would also say that as a venture capitalist, I have sat around that table, as a lawyer, as somebody who ran a business, as an entrepreneur, as running a large business in a large company, as an investor. So I sort of sat in all those chairs, which comes in very helpful. And I have to say, having been an entrepreneur and having, led my startup, although unsuccessfully in hindsight, I do understand where entrepreneurs come from. I do understand the challenges they face. I do understand how they need, what kind of support they need, and what kind of interference they don't need. So that also becomes very valuable.
Yeah. And you just mentioned unsuccessful, but it probably gives you even more empathy towards the entrepreneurs you meet than if you had been successful.
That is true. So over the years, a number of companies have come to me for advice when they start their CVC or want to improve their CVC. And I enjoy doing that to share. And basically what I say to them is, look, I'll share with you the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay. I will share with you all the mistakes we have made. And all the good stuff, I said, I don't know whether we were smart or we were lucky. Okay. And so very often you never know which one it is. And so, your success could be smarts, could be good timing, could be luck, whatever. It doesn't, but you certainly know that your mistakes are your own. So both are learning factors, but you learn far more from mistakes.
I like the framework of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So one thing that comes across also in your journey is you really got a lot of experience on the late stage side before moving into the early stage. And yes, even at Total Energies, actually, you were quite nicely balanced in building the portfolio. So can you share about your best practices in terms of thinking about early stage, late stage, and how the skill sets need to be different?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're right. My early part of my investing career has been leverage buyouts, M&A, and things like that, which is even beyond late stage. I mean, they are more growth companies.
Yeah.
And I spent 2-3 years doing workouts, which is all the LBOs which had gone bad. Working with the investment committee, with the credit committees, and I had a portfolio of about 15 companies at various stages of bankruptcy or workout. That's also an important lesson as to what could go wrong and how do you protect yourself in case things go wrong, right?
You've seen the ugly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As they say, when Mercedes drives its car in a Formula One race, it learns a lot more about the car in that one race than it does in 10 years of driving. So it's the same thing when you do workouts or bankruptcy. Okay. I would say, at ABB, we said we are stage agnostic. But when I came to Total, what I did was I created what I defined as a barbell strategy.
Yep.
And as we all know, in venture investing, you have three basic risks. You have the technology risk, which is will it work? You have the market risk, which is even if it works, will the market be willing to buy it and pay a premium for it, or pay a price for it? And the third one is financing risk or funding risk, right? And in my experience, even though technology risk does exist, more of my companies struggle with market risk than they did with technology risk. Okay. Particularly on the industrial, in the B2C world, right? 6 to 9 months whether you're going to be successful or not. There is no struggling 5-year-old B2C company. Okay. But in the industrial and the energy space, as I like to say, it takes you 20 years to be an overnight success. And so market access and market penetration and customer acceptance is a big issue. I mean, there are all kinds of issues from infrastructure, switching costs, etc. And so for me, the bigger challenge was market, risk. So what we decided is, look, we're not going to invest in a company unless they have at least 5 million of revenue. Okay, not pilots. We did that mistake before, investing in a company because they had 15 different pilots, and then we realized there was something called death by pilots.
Yes.
And pilots don't always become revenue. So we said, look, we want 5 million of revenues. It's not a bright line, but basically that's the range, because it tells us there is market acceptance. It tells us there are paying customers, etc. And there is a product market fit. I don't care whether you call it series A, B, X, Y, whatever. That is irrelevant. The issue is, have you made that jump? Okay.
Yeah.
And then we put a certain amount of money in very early stage companies, seed, pre-seed, which we felt had the potential to be highly disruptive, either because of their technology or because of their the business model, etc. And we sort of invested in it. And if it didn't work out, that's all we lost. And so this is how we came about. Okay. Now, the challenge I find is not too many people are willing to invest in very early stage. Okay. And particularly funds raising money for early stage companies find it far more difficult to raise funds. Okay. You go to the pension funds, you go to the institutional investors. Oh, we don't do that. We don't do this. It's too small, too early. And so basically the problem is everybody wants to, pluck the fruits and enjoy them, but nobody wants to plant the trees. And that is a major challenge.
That's a good analogy. And so the barbell strategy is very interesting for me, because you get to access all the very early innovations, but very fragile, but you get access to it. And then you invest when you have real revenue, and the golden nugget is don't get fooled by thinking that pilots revenue is customer revenue. Correct. And so that I think is really meaningful. But what happens in between? Is it because you feel like the market acceptance is too uncertain that you wouldn't want to do it? I mean, you could argue that you want to do across the full stages. So barbell for me it totally makes sense for the early stage and the 5 million revenue, but why not even look at the one in the between?
As I said, the risk is too high.
Too high.
You don't really know how long will the market take, if at all, to accept the product. Okay. And I've seen this happen where you think it's the most brilliant product, the market needs it, but somehow the dog doesn't eat the dog food. Okay. I haven't been fully able to understand it, but it happens. Okay. We have had many companies like this where we see the need, the customer says there is a need, but they're just unwilling to pay for it. And so the question is, how long can this happen? How long? It becomes a race between burn rate and adoption rate.
Yes.
And startups can't afford that. Okay. Now, there is a famous case study at IMD and other places about these coffee pods. I forget the name now. I don't drink coffee. Espresso, yeah, whatever. Yeah, Nespresso.
Espresso.
And it's a very interesting case that it took them a very, very long time. Today everybody assumes it's the most obvious product, but if you look at the case study, it really took a long time for the market to adopt it. But to the company's credit, they kept at it. Okay, so that's one thing. But the second thing is they put a lot of capital in it to survive. But a startup doesn't have that luxury.
Yep.
Okay? And then what you see very often, and I have to tell you, as an entrepreneur, I fell to the same problem, which is, you create a product and the market doesn't go for it, and you say, oh, maybe it needs these two extra things, and then you add that, and then it doesn't work. Oh, no, if only it had this, application or this functionality, then the market would take it. And you keep adding and you keep adding and you keep spending money on your product development. Which is why the whole notion of minimum viable product, product market fit, beta, all that is very, very important, and you have to have the courage to say, if the market isn't buying it, either the market isn't there or there is some reason it hasn't developed, and maybe we just need to walk away.
So I think the golden nugget I'm taking from this is this 5 million revenue from customers give you a timing predictability, and also it moves away from the value creation to the value capturing.
Correct.
You already okay.
Absolutely. A good way to put that. Yeah.
I want to go back to your journey, and you mentioned GE Capital, which is one of the success story and a lot of top corporate venturing professionals, but then it didn't have the good ending. Can you share maybe some of the learnings, both on the positive and things you would have done differently?
Yeah. GE Capital was an extraordinary organization, and I think it is very, very successful, as you rightly point out. And lots of people talk about towards the end, it didn't do well, but many people don't really know what actually happened. And if you're interested, I'm happy to talk about that.
Yes, please.
But they did have two different venture capital groups. Okay. One was more technology driven. It was run by a person I know very well and respect called Steve Smith, and more cutting edge technology. And the other one was a more traditional venture capital. Okay. But it wasn't. Now, if memory serves right, GE Capital has had many variations of their venture group, and they've sort of been in and out of it. Okay. Some of the GE Capital versions were more independent financial businesses. They were not truly corporate venture groups. Yes, they did turn to the corporate for help and advice and support, but their mandate, like the rest of GE Capital, was to be a true financial services company. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's only later on, under Colleen and Susan, etc., which it became a true CVC. That was a different era. So GE Capital or GE Ventures has gone through multiple variations and multiple versions of it, if my memory is correct.
Okay. And so what, from the time you were there, what was the best practices you captured that you still used afterwards?
Yeah. They were extraordinary in their due diligence. They really, really, looked at a company inside out, evaluated everything. I'll give you a simple example. One of my first deals, which I looked at, was the acquisition of AT&T's AT&T Capital's portfolio. We never did the deal, but we were one of the bidders for it, and we went to do the due diligence, and we had about over 50 people doing in the due diligence room, physically due diligence, these are pre-internet days, so you had to sort of go and actually review the documents. We had almost as many people doing due diligence as AT&T Capital had employees, okay? And they evaluated everything. Now that's an M&A transaction. The level of due diligence is very different, and there are reasons for that. But they were very, very good at that. They were very good at now the one and evaluating, etc. The one thing which they struggled with was, and which is why it hurt them a lot, was, G Capital was very often viewed as the lender of last resort. And the reason was because they always had very tough terms, and they always, and the problem was, at least when I was there, and when somebody called Gary Wendt was running it, and he's sort of credited with making G Capital the giant it was, an extraordinarily brilliant man, is that every time you came for approval, he would insist on changing the terms and asking for something extra, something more, etc. Right? And Gary Wendt, again, his view was, there are a lot of people, including me, who feel a deal should be a win-win, that both sides should walk away thinking each side has won. Okay, otherwise. But his view was, I haven't won until you have lost.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, and he was a very tough negotiator, a very smart guy, obviously incredibly successful, having built up G Capital. But he would always squeeze as much as he could. And so G Capital got the reputation of, okay, you agree on a term sheet, you agree on the terms, and then last minute you come back and ask for something more. And the reason was not because the deal team was playing games or was trying to be dishonest, whatever. It was just that when they went up the ladder, the command came down, no, you're going to ask for these 3 more things.
Wow. Okay. And I'm guessing you would agree that's not something a CVC should be doing.
No. Look, reputation is an extraordinarily important thing. Okay. How people, there are some people you deal with on a handshake, you don't care what the legal document says. Other people, you want a very tight agreement. And the third type, you don't want to deal at all, no matter how much. Okay.
Yeah.
Reputation is important. What goes around comes around. Okay. And invariably your soft power or your reputation helps. I can tell you, I've been involved with a small number, not too many, fortunately, VC firms, okay, who will treat you as a last resort because nobody else is willing to do the deal. They come to you. Their assumption is because you're a CVC, you're dumb capital.
Yeah.
Okay. And unfortunately, I've seen enough dumb capital CVCs because of lack of experience or too eager. Or they will use you and your corporate team, your R&D people, business people, to do due diligence, and then they will cut you out of the deal. Okay. And when that happens, not only do I never deal with them again, but I make sure that I spread that reputation to everybody I know so that they don't deal with that company again either, or that VC again. Okay.
I think it's, everyone says that it takes 10 years for a reputation to be built and 10 minutes to be lost. And
you're right. And another way of putting this, which I do, is I say, vitamins take, years to help you, but poison takes only seconds.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I want to talk about that very special email you mentioned. I don't know if you printed it and you kept it somewhere, but it's probably very inspiring for the audience, who are people who are thinking about creating their own CVC, where you send that email to the CEO and within 30 minutes say, yeah, go run with it. Now, not everyone has the same CEO, but I'm sure there is a lot of things that you crafted in that email. It couldn't be too long, it couldn't be too complex, but it had to be punchy and the right thing. So can you walk us through how you crafted that email as much as you remember?
It was not a pitch, it was just a paragraph. Okay. Now, keep in mind, the reason I sent it was because I knew Joe Hogan's background and where he came from. So I knew he was familiar with the concept of a CVC. I knew, being coming from GE, I knew how he thought, so none of this was new to him. And therefore, it was sort of an easy sell, if you will, right?
Yeah.
If it was not him, if it was, another maybe European, German, Swedish, whatever CEO who hadn't been exposed to that, I may not have taken that step. Okay, so I sort of saw that the timing was right. The ducks had aligned very well in terms of who the CEO was, the fact that ABB was sitting on some excess cash, that the financial markets, freezing the funding, et cetera, et cetera. And him feeling about the not in. So I just wrote him a one paragraph note saying, "Hey, Joe, I'd like to propose we start a CVC. You've been complaining about a not invented here syndrome. We're sitting on 500 million of cash. Great valuations to be had. What do you think about it?" So it was a very simple one paragraph letter.
Very nice. But you did leverage the NIH, the not invented here concept that he was talking about.
Yeah.
And so clearly even though it was not a pitch, the concept was we want to find the innovation that comes from the outside, brings them in.
Correct.
So let's double click on this. Is how did you at ABB ensure that you were first getting innovations from the outside, but also if there was a NIH DNA there, how did you manage to percolate through it?
Yeah. Look, I mean, that's in some ways the heart of challenge most CVCs face. Okay. So look, I'll give you a couple of examples, and then so once we brought one of the early days of ABB Technology Ventures, we were looking at a certain deal, and we asked one of our, ABB had 1,500 PhDs, if not more, and we asked one of the top PhD guys in R&D to take a look. And the guy, we kind of pestered him, and then a week or 10 days later, he says, "Oh, it doesn't make sense." Okay, fine. The guy is smart, he knows what he's talking about. We told the company, it doesn't make sense. Our people don't think it makes sense. And the company called back and said, "We don't understand this because nobody has ever accessed our database." Okay. So the first lesson was this guy just was shooting from the hip. Okay.
Yeah.
And didn't really take the effort. Okay. Then over time, we realized that when the R&D folks said, "Oh, it does not work or will not work," what it really meant was we tried it ourselves 5 years ago. We couldn't do it. And therefore, we don't think anybody else can do it because we are so smart. Okay. And you know what? Sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. I'm not saying R&D is right all the time. I'm not saying R&D is wrong all the time. But you got to be able to understand and sort of sift through their biases. Okay. And so what I often insist in that time is to say, okay, you may be right. What I'd like to do is have a call with the company, their top people, and maybe some of their existing investors who have invested. Obviously, they have done their due diligence. And I'd like us all to have a conversation, which is what did they see to invest, which we are not seeing. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you are right and they have missed something, and sometimes they are right and you have missed something. Okay. But it's important to have this conversation to say, why are we at a different place? And sometimes we agree to disagree, right? But at least it is a thought through discussion, etc., and not just, playing to your biases.
Yeah. And I can see there's a lot of collaborative spirit in what you're describing.
Yeah. The other thing I would also say is very often we have been to businesses and say, "Hey, look at this." Okay. "Oh, we have no interest. It's not on our product, this line, etc." And my attitude is, okay, fine. I see where my job is to look around the corner. Your job is to focus on the next quarter or the next year. Okay. So you may not be interested or even be aware of what's happening 3 years or 5 years from now. Okay. But that's my job. And if I think that's where things are converging, even if you don't think that's important to you today, I will make an investment, because 3 years from now, you will thank me, and which invariably happens. Okay. So I remember when I moved to Total Energies, the person who headed the downstream business, or as they call marketing and services, did not believe in EVs. He didn't think EVs made any sense, will never succeed. And I said, "You know what? That's fine. That's your view, but I do think they will work. And so we will make EV investments." And guess what? Now they realize that's very important. So you have to be able to say, the future is somewhere you're not either aware of or focusing on, and we are going to create. And so remember, the single most value which a CVC brings is to create optionality.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in my experience, having worked at a number of companies and CVCs and advised many, what's very clear is that the companies or the divisions or the BUs which will support you and give you some leverage or whatever is the ones who are facing a burning platform. If they're facing a burning platform, whether it's in mobility, whether it's in e-commerce, whatever, right? Then and that platform is being burned by startups, suddenly they are very interested in what's happening.
Yes.
But if they are in a stable business and doesn't look like it's going to change except on the margins here and there for the next 5-10 years, they have less interest because it's not urgent for them. It's not moving the needle for them.
So I'll go back to the burning platform, but I want to capture the golden nugget of optionality.
Yeah.
And the way I hear from you is it's this nice combination of strong conviction that you need to build as a CVC and the humility that you may be wrong. And once you do that, it's about building that optionality that business groups need to appreciate is a mission of the CVC.
I think that's well put. So, if I can put in the context, say, of Total Energies, okay, we know energy transition is happening. Okay, we know that.
Yeah.
What we don't know is which technologies will actually win and over what period of time.
Yep.
Take solar, for example. Today, it's obvious it's at grid parity. It's the cheapest form of energy generation. But let's not forget that the first PV cells were invented by Bell Labs back in the 1950s.
Yep.
So had you invested in PV cells in the 70s, say 20 years after that, you'd still be wrong in timing, right? So the question is, you may be right, but you have either you could come in, if you move through an acquisition or R&D, you could be too early. And we have examples of Siemens and BP and even Total, who made acquisitions in renewables 15 years ago and had to write them off because they were too early. Or you wait too long, and then either you miss the good opportunities or they're too expensive to get into or whatever, right? So a better way is to say, look, I don't know which way it's going, but I know it's moving. So let me dip my toe in, keep an eye on that. And as I see progress or things improving, then I can increase my bet and I can increase my participation. And so that is, in the end, optionality. And I think that the pharmacy industry has got that down to a science.
Actually, it's optionality at very low cost. And I think you just implied it when you said dip your toe. Don't put the full leg right away. Dip your toe and then learn when is the right time.
Exactly.
So you mentioned very early in this interview about timing is everything, and being too early is the same as being wrong. And what I find interesting, and that connects with that very cheap optionality, is corporate VC and even financial VCs needs to be right maybe 2 years early before it's obvious to everyone else. So can you speak to in a way, the luxury of being early but not too early compared to a corporation that can't afford to be too early?
Yeah. There is always a sense of FOMO, okay, which is the fear of missing out. And so you want to time it just right. You're too early, you lose, or you take too long, or take too much capital, you wait too long, etc. FOMO may work in some industries, but I think in industrial and others, you don't have to worry too much about FOMO because things don't change that rapidly and that quickly. Okay. The other thing which I did in managing, Total Energy Ventures was sort of bring in some of the sensibilities of a private equity world. Okay. What do I mean by that? In the typical VC, maybe, when you're investing in social media and one of those things, you say, I don't care if 9 of my companies fail, so long as the 10th one is a Google or the Apple or whatever. Okay. The problem is in the industrial and energy space, there are no Apples, there are no Googles. Okay. So you need to make sure that you are, you're getting success across the companies. And the best way of ensuring is you don't lose money. So my first mandate was, first, let's play defensive. I just want to make sure I don't lose money. Okay. And I'd rather have 5 companies with a 3x return than worry about that, 10x return or 100x return. And so very often we would, even where the company has not had an exit and maybe there's, growth stage financing, and if somebody is willing, wants to do a, recap, etc., or a big growth investor comes in and says, look, I want to buy, we are more than happy to sell out at a 3 or a 4x, because a 3 or a 4x certain in my pocket, to me, is far more important and valuable than a potential 10x down the line. Okay. And in the last, and I've been in this business long enough to know what the signs are of market being at the top. Okay. When you have hedge funds coming in, when you have mutual funds coming in, when you have the non-traditional investors coming in, it's the time to run away. Okay.
That's golden nugget here.
Yeah. Absolutely. Without fail. Without fail.
Wow. So I want to double click because intuitively I can see why, if you have an ability to lock a 3x or 4x, you should take it.
Yeah.
But I can also see why the audience might think, wait, maybe it could go even higher. But yet, as a corporate VC, you also want to show success stories, you want to show proof points and so on. So can you walk us the trade-off you have in your mind when you want to lock a win versus keep it running?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think the first issue, as you rightly point out, which is unique to CVCs, which is not for the VCs, is to demonstrate to your bosses that you are successful, okay, and to see that cash coming in. And in fact, when I was brought to Total Energy Ventures, back in 2017, and Total Energy Ventures has been around since 2009, but their early part, they were investing in clean tech 1.0 and in a lot of stuff in very difficult sectors, biofuels, algae, battery systems, etc. Smart people doing good deals, but it was just a very tough environment. And as everybody discovered, this thing takes coming from the dot-com boom to this, everybody realized a little late that this takes a lot more time and a lot more money than just throwing 6 programmers to solve a problem. And so our CEO Patrick Pouyanné said, look, all I've seen is money going out. I've not seen any money coming in. Okay. And so I want you to make me money. Okay. And so there is an imperative where you have to show money coming back in, even if it is not the highest amount. Okay. Now you could argue, is that a smart thing to do or not? But you also have other constituencies, etc. The other aspect of that, even putting aside the corporate venture group requirements, is if you see that the company is truly doing well and is hitting on all cylinders, and the exit markets are there, and potentially an IPO, then you might want to run with your winners, okay? Or you do, you take some money off, you cover your cost of investment, and you let the rest ride. It's a little bit like what's your gambling strategy when you go to Vegas or whatever. There's this concept of house money, etc., right? But if you see that, that all this is, overvalued and there's no real viable exit there, you have to realize that the IPO market is very tough, okay? You're locked up for 6 months, right? And so just because you can go IPO doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get it at the IPO price. You're going to see where the market is, how frothy it is. From a trade exit, which company is going to pay that kind of multiple, right? If I'm Schneider trading at, 15 times earnings, or if I'm BP or Shell or whatever, why would I be paying, 50 times revenue for a company? Okay. Now, if it's a small company, and I'm just paying 30 million for something, I really don't care what the multiple is, because all I'm really doing is, doing an acqui-hire or buying something for the platform. But if you expect me to pay serious money, valuation metrics do become an issue. Okay. And so if I feel that, market is overvalued, okay, and everybody loves to have their company be valued, But if I think this is a reasonable price, money in the bank is better than, money, is still in the company.
Yeah.
Now, there is a different experience. I said to you that, that our CEO said to me, I've seen only money going out. Now, we had an interesting situation at Total Energy Ventures. This is before my time, where they had invested in a company in the sustainable aviation fuel business. Company went public, and they were at one point sitting on profit of $60 million. Okay. They wanted to sell that venture group, saying, look, good price, good valuation, etc. But the business said, no, this is a strong strategic, company crashed. When I came on board, I essentially cleaned up the portfolio and sold that company's shares for $7,000. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Now, so I created the following rules. First, if a business wants me to do a transaction which I don't think makes sense for me financially, but I am being persuaded or to do it because it's good for the business, I said, fine, I'll do it. It's important that we have a strategic. But Mr. BU manager, I want you to give me a put agreement on this deal. If this deal craters or crashes, I will put my shares back to you at my cost. Okay, I've done that at Total. Right, so I don't want to bear the risk. If I'm being evaluated on what my performance, I want to decide where I want to invest. Okay, I've done that. Then we were very fortunate that because of our barbell strategy, when the SPACs happened, we were very well positioned for that, and we had almost 11 exits in 18 months at some of the most ridiculous valuations.
I remember we were talking at the time. That was pretty amazing.
So my view is, the moment a company goes public or whatever, right? I want to sell. If there's an exit event, I want to sell, particularly if a company goes public. I am not in the business of riding the shares up. I'm not a public company investor. I'm not tracking the market. I don't have the expertise to know this is a good time or bad time, okay? I may be leaving money on the table, but I'd rather say, look, it's a rule. Nobody's second guessing me. Sometimes I may be right, sometimes I may be wrong, but I'm doing it. Again, we had an investment in a company which went public, and we wanted to sell the moment we had the lockup was over. The business which was interested said, no, we're strategic for us. We want you to stay on with it. I said, fine, let me sell it to you at market price. Right? Oh, no. I said, well, basically what you're telling me is you want a strategic benefit at my expense, or you want to leverage me, right? I said, you're welcome to buy it from me. Okay. And then, of course, then they back down. So you got to come up with some of these approaches to make sure that your interests are well protected. Otherwise, it gets very difficult.
No, I think it's a lot of golden nuggets and even ideas about how to engage with a business group that want to force an investment, which I call kissing the frog, or wanting you to keep when it makes sense to sell. Yeah. And I like your rule-based process, because maybe sometimes you're right, maybe sometimes you're wrong, but you have at least the rules that people know you're going to abide to. Yeah. Now, we talked about being too early, but you mentioned burning platform inside the company or different units inside the company, which you could argue means too late. Yeah. So how do you handle the burning platform inside the mothership, and how do you make sure that even though it looks too late, you can still bring value?
Yeah. Look, when you say it's too late, what you're basically saying is it's too late to enter into this company, okay? But it's never too late to enter into that segment, because if it's truly a huge sector which is being created, you can always come in even later by either creating your own platform internally, etc. Because remember, what you're really doing when you are investing in these startups, okay, is validating two things: validating the technology, but more importantly, you're validating the existence of a market.
Yes.
Is there really a market for EVs? Will people really buy EVs? Is there really a market for rooftop solar? That's what you're doing, right? Now, it was always nice to buy that EV platform or that the battery EV charging platform, etc. But it's not the end of the day if you miss that, because once the market has been validated and it turns out to be a multi-billion dollar, right, there will always be other followers, or you can do it on your own.
Yep.
So I would say don't panic. And if that's the only company that can give you entry to that marketplace, that sector isn't big enough.
That's a good way to think about it. You're right. If it's only one, then it can't be such a big TAM.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about something that you have a lot of experience, and I think it's an important thing, something to think for CVCs about, which is investing in funds.
Yes.
CVCs have a choice to invest directly into startups, but sometimes they could actually consider investing in funds. And you've deployed quite a strategy at Total Energies Ventures. Would you mind sharing how you thought about it, how you started it, and the best practices coming from it?
Yeah. It's one of those things which is always a debate in many CVCs, right? The one extreme you have, which is IBM. I don't know if you still do that, but I remember under Claudia Fanmunzi and others, they never invested directly. They only did funds. And the reason for that for them was, as it explained to me, was they have so much R&D in so many areas that they didn't want to get into a conflict or a litigation, etc., on patent infringement and other things. So they wanted to have that barrier between the company and themselves. So they only did funds, okay, which makes perfect sense for them, and it was a good strategy. And for young CVCs, funds are helpful, because they give you access to the market. They sort of hold your hand. You can see their deal flow. Many funds like Chrysalix used to do, or etc. You can send somebody to be trained by them. We have had Total Energy Ventures people go there, spend 9 months, a year, etc. People like Emerald or EIP can train your people, and I think that's very valuable. Okay? The challenge becomes in the mind of some people that funds don't allow you direct access to the company, etc. I'm not sure that's entirely true, but that's the perception. So when I came to Total, so when I was at ABB Technology Ventures, we certainly did. We invested in some funds, Emerald Technology Ventures and Clear Sky, etc. Okay, we helped sort of anchor Clear Sky and a couple of others, Chrysalix, I believe, I don't remember. So when I came to Total, having been in the business for 7-8 years, okay, I felt we didn't really need the funds from a deal flow perspective. We were seeing all the same deals, and I had some very, very talented and experienced people on my team, so we didn't really need that. But I said, okay, so we will do funds only in one of the following situations. Either it's in a country where we don't really have a presence in or knowledge of, or difficult to do business in. China is a very good example.
Yep.
Okay. We will invest. Or it's in a sector which is very capital intensive and high risk, such that it makes more sense to invest in a fund so that you can get my 5 million can get exposure to 20 deals rather than my investing in 1 or 2 at the most. Okay, you have specialized people, you have the portfolio, etc. Or it's in a sector which is emerging, so I know the sector is going to do well. Could be AI, could be drones, but it's too early to pick the winners.
Yeah.
So once again, you want the portfolio approach, and etc. Okay. And the same thing where the industry is fragmented and you say you want a portfolio approach, because it's too early or I'm not smart enough, or both, to decide who the winners are. But we know that the sector as a whole is going to do well. So that becomes a very good reason to invest. So I would say these are the investments. Having said that, as you know, I was involved in OGCI, and I was on the board of OGCI for 5 years, and now I'm back as a senior advisor. For those who don't know, OGCI stands for Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, formed by the 10 largest non-US oil and gas companies, and then Exxon, Chevron, and Occidental joined. and they had $1 billion to fund, and now they're raising the second fund. And the whole point was to address greenhouse gas emissions, through carbon capture, carbon dioxide, methane reduction, etc. And then, as some of you may also know, I led the creation of the first hydrogen infrastructure fund, High 24 Partners, okay, where Total was the anchor investor at 100 million, along with Air Liquide and Vinci. And then I sort of, led the, it was led initially by Pierre-Etienne Franck, who was the head of BU, hydrogen BU at Air Liquide, and then he left them. So I had to step in and sort of run the creation and raising of the funds. And we closed that at 2 billion euros last year. And then of course you have the fund from Alliance for Plastic Waste, which was, we sort of gave them a little bit of advice on fund structure, etc. And what those experiences taught me was there are many industry challenges which cannot be solved by a few VC firms or a few companies on their own. Okay, they have to be solved by the ecosystem coming together.
Yep.
So that you work together, you work in tandem, right? You can't really have an ecosystem where, let's say in hydrogen, where the people are manufacturing, but there's nobody doing transportation, or, like in the EV business, you have a mismatch. There's a chicken and egg problem between the people who create EVs versus the CP charging points, etc. So you have to get the ecosystem together, work together, move at the same speed, and support each other, create the value chain, create the supply chain, etc. Okay. And so that's where being part of these funds becomes very valuable and very important. Okay. And the whole point of the hydrogen infrastructure fund was to kickstart the hydrogen ecosystem. Everybody is talking about hydrogen, but everybody's waiting for somebody else to make the first move. And he said, look, let's do it together. Let's do it on all four fronts. Okay. And you clearly have lots of companies who see the value of that and do that. And then I have to say, with a great amount of disappointment, there are those companies who are leaders in a sector, but who don't step up, either because they want to be free riders, or you hear the most ridiculous explanations like, oh, we don't know how to do funds, or, oh, we don't know where to book the fund. I cannot tell you how many companies have told me, we do not know where to book it. Really? That is your barrier to entry? I mean, you're a multi-billion-dollar company and you don't know where to freaking book it. I mean, it is extraordinarily disappointing that, and which takes me into my next soapbox, which is I am extraordinarily disappointed at how little major corporations are doing to address energy transition. Everybody speaks a great game. Everybody talks of balancing shareholder needs. Everybody talks of whatever. At the end of the day, it does not matter what you say. Climate events are happening with regular occurrence and with increasing intensity.
Yep. Actually, I totally agree. And it's action that speaks. And action for a corporation is about resource allocation, whether it's the mothership or it's your investments in climate tech.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to talk about sustainability, but I'll make one point, which is what you've created with these funds is what the business school IESC just published recently with Julia and Jose Maria, which is corporate venturing as a squad, where different companies come together to create even more value together.
Yeah.
So you make me think that I'm going to interview IESC in the next podcast. But I want to talk about sustainability in the last 7 minutes, because that's one of the things that I know you're passionate about. Yes. You have put actions, not just words on it. So please tell us first about how you see corporate venturing's role and how meaningful it could be for climate.
Look, corporate venturing is just the tip of the spear. Okay. So it's not just corporate venturing alone. It has to be the company as a whole which is driving towards sustainability. Okay, it's in terms of its investment strategies. It's in terms of how it addresses its scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 targets. It's in terms of how aggressively they're going to achieve net zero. Now in terms of corporate venturing, it's not just making the investments. It's also creating pilot projects, proof of concepts, and eventually acquiring those companies. Okay. So a VC ecosystem cannot exist without successful startups.
Yeah.
And successful startups happen with them, having growing sales, with them having pilots which lead to revenue, with them exiting, etc. Okay, and that's where I see these companies. Yes, lots of large oil and gas and energy and other companies have CVCs. But if you see the amount of money they invest through a CVC versus their overall capital budget, R&D budget, or their overall capital expenditure budget, it's minuscule. I mean, it's a rounding error. Okay, and so I would say, stop patting yourself on the back about what you're doing and do something really substantive.
And so when we think about sustainability, there is a lot of tailwinds in North America, in Europe, but there is also, and you were speaking at the Harvard conference, which I attended, there's all this concept of global South and of course global North, which most people miss.
Yes.
Do you mind actually making sure we capture that in this interview, which is the equity side of sustainability?
Yeah. Look, I mean, there are a whole range of issues relating to that. Okay. Now, the first point, which was made by one of my co-panelists, Jayant Sinha, who used to be a minister in the Indian government and now is a member of parliament, is that, look, even if the global North achieves net zero within the time frame they have set for themselves, it will still not be enough to meet the 1.5 target or whatever target you set for yourself, because the global South is also surging in growth. Okay, you look at India, you look at many other countries. Okay, and so we need to help them also achieve net zero. Okay, now the question of equity turns out to say is, look, we can't turn around to them and say, don't use enough energy, live the way you're living now, because a lot 90% of the carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases today have been emitted by the global North over the last 50, 100 years. And they have achieved a certain standard of living. And now to expect the others not to aspire to that standard of living is a matter of equity and fairness, etc. But on the other hand, you can't also say, okay, fine, go on, do what you want, because the world will collapse. Okay, and so the question becomes, how do we help the global South grow and have their energy needs addressed, but at the same time doing it in a way which sort of contributes to net zero and does not contribute to increasing greenhouse gases. So we have to focus, okay, on helping the global South achieve its growth aspirations, but at the same time doing it in a way which meets net zero targets.
Thank you. And so in my last 2 minutes, my last question is much more about being hopeful. What makes you hopeful about the future when it comes to sustainability?
Yes. In Cleantech 1.0, the challenge was, amongst other things, if you came up with a biofuel or you came up with a biodegradable plastic or whatever, the customer would say, well, okay, I'll take it, but so long as the price is the same and the functionality is the same. Okay. Today, more and more people are willing to pay a green premium, whether it's for sustainable aviation fuel or etc. Okay. Today, the reason to be somewhat optimistic is companies have nowhere to hide. There's pressure from NGOs, there's pressure from customers, there is pressure from banks, there is pressure from potential employees. Lots of energy companies are finding young people don't want to work for them. There's pressure from the SEC, from the reporting, etc. So everywhere there is pressure to decarbonize and to demonstrate that you are achieving your net zero targets. And so that, to me, gives some level of comfort that, the places to hide are becoming fewer and fewer.
Thank you, Girish, for your time. You shared a lot of golden nuggets on corporate venturing, but also on sustainability and how to think about getting the innovation into the mothership. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I mean, a great question. So appreciate the opportunity.